Welcome to the AT&T teleconferencing service. Enter your Enter your attendee ID number followed by pound. If you do not know your line has been muted. Press star 6 to unmute your own line.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Okay, obviously we have 3 major stories that will drive the next 6 weeks. Coronavirus, Supreme Court, and the election, which is 6 weeks from tomorrow, Election Day. And obviously they're all related and intersect, and those will be the 3 stories that drive the next 6 weeks. Today, the United States will pass 200,000 coronavirus deaths. It's a terrible milestone, and that is where we start. Matthew?
Okay, and so besides that milestone, the U.S. is also on pace to cross 7 million cases this week sometime. We are seeing several signs pointing to upticks now. It's always about the trend. The U.S. 7-day average of new daily cases is back up over 40,000, kicking up for a week now. The CDC finally acknowledging what other organizations and many doctors have been telling us for months about COVID's spread, that it can happen through tiny suspended aerosolized particles that can hang in the air for hours. We're trying to find out a little more, report out what led to this change finally. It's interesting that the CDC specifically calls out examples in its guidance like restaurants, fitness classes, and choir practice, some of the very things that have reopened. This, of course, bolsters significantly the argument for masks and 6 feet or more of distancing. Task force members continue to spin the confusion around vaccine timelines. Giroir telling Jake that Trump and Redfield are both right, even though they said different things about wide availability. Trump just said on Fox, maybe the end of October for an announcement. Giroir did say something yesterday that I think is an interesting discussion point for guests today. The point that even a few million early doses would be, in his words, a godsend, that if we have, he says, 5 or 10% of the population vaccinated, we can get 80 to 90% of the benefit. Worth exploring. And as we think about timelines for ourselves and our country, Bill Gates, Sunday, best guess, the country starts going back to normal next summer. The pandemic, he says, is with us till 2022. Some key data points, some key regions on the CNN map. Big swaths of the Midwest and West are red now, up week to week in new cases. 28 states up, 16 steady, 6 down week to week, so more than half going in the wrong direction. Lots of states setting one-day records in recent days again. One of them, Wisconsin, which has the nation's highest positivity rate. 5 states with rates over 15%. Wisconsin, Idaho, South Dakota, Iowa, and Kansas. Some regular hot spots, Florida and Texas, back red on the map after seeing many weeks of declines. We've got Rosa Flores in Miami. There is concern about this possible super spreader event in Missouri. Bike Fest just wrapped up in the Lake of the Ozarks area. No distancing, no masks, no capacity limits. This is a White House designated red zone. The event typically draws 100,000. In case you're wondering, in the weeks since the Sturgis motorcycle rally, South Dakota's numbers for new daily cases have tripled. The U.S. average of daily deaths now just under 800 a day. And a reminder that Sanjay has this step-back piece ready to roll when we do cross that terrible 200,000 milestone. We've also got Alexandra Field in New York on the various lines and regions today. On schools, the president of New York City's union just said he is pretty confident that in-person learning will begin on time, on the latest timetable, next week in the city, but nothing is certain, he says, and Bianca Golodriga stays on education threads. And then the health team is focusing on three reporting targets we're trying to flesh out today. One, testing. We are weeks since several major announcements about tens of millions new tests a month flooding the market, but testing numbers have been in the same neighborhood for 3 months now. That doesn't add up. About 800,000 a day on average. The last few days have ticked up a good bit. We'll see if that trend turns. Then on antibody treatment, September is almost over, so we are very much in the window where companies like Regeneron said the news would come about their trials about antibody therapy treatments. Working on that. And we're also trying to report out further the upshot of this order signed by Azar of HHS, which we've now obtained on our own, barring other agencies, including the FDA, from signing new rules on products, including vaccines. We've also got a WHO briefing at 11 o'clock. We've got Elizabeth Cohen available through the day, Sanjay for the DC and the Prime shows. We've got the wrap pieces today, and they are Nick Watt for 4, 6, and 8, Athena Jones for 5, 7, and 9. And I will pause there.
Thank you, Matthew. And I would just add that once again this morning, Trump gave himself an A+ on dealing with COVID, and I think that's an important thing to note as we cross 200,000 deaths. And I also think it's worth noting Bill Gates' comments about when life will get back to normal, and Trump's reaction to that this morning as well. International COVID.
Hey, so virus fears in Europe took on a new life this weekend. I'll start in the UK. There was a news conference this morning with the UK government chief medical and scientific officers. They're saying the UK has turned a corner in a bad way, and that the number of cases in the UK is doubling roughly every 7 days. And if this continues, by mid-October, they'd be at 50,000 cases a day. So Scott McLean has all of that reporting. This comes as the cabinet debates what to do, threats of another lockdown loom, and we'll hear more from Boris likely tomorrow. Melissa Bell is looking at the rest of Europe. France posting record numbers over the weekend. Spain also dealing with increasing numbers, leading to controversial local lockdowns near Madrid. And the German health minister is also looking to introduce additional measures to fight COVID this fall. Max Foster has a package on the Swedish government planning to target adults only with COVID vaccine on a voluntary basis, essentially standing by its belief that children only transfer COVID in a limited way. So again, this package looks at how differently Sweden is handling the COVID crisis compared to others. In Asia, in New Zealand, pandemic restrictions lifted across the country except in Auckland, where we saw the latest outbreak. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister had to apologize at a newser this morning after taking heat for not following her own social distancing rules in selfies recently on the campaign trail. And we know she's been lauded so much on the way that she's been handling COVID. So Christy Lou Stout has that look live. And then lastly, in Australia, targeted lockdown efforts in Victoria seem to be paying off. New cases are down significantly, and Angus Watson has that look live for us. So that's where we are in COVID.
Thank you very much, Penny. Business COVID.
Jeff, good morning. Stocks getting hammered this morning following 3 straight weeks of declines. Investors continuing to grow concerns over the lack of stimulus from Congress, increased tension with China, and of course those rising cases in Europe that Penny just mentioned. Financials also under pressure this morning following that leak of suspicious activity reports that were obtained by BuzzFeed News, suggesting that trillions of dirty money flowed from U.S. banks on behalf of entities, including international criminals, the Taliban, in North Korea. And investors this morning also watching developments on the Supreme Court following the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Of course, there are fears that the looming fight over how and when to replace Ginsburg could derail these talks and add much-needed stimulus to the economy. economy. Obviously, 30 million Americans right now on some form of unemployment, and also her death injecting new uncertainty into the fate of the Affordable Care Act. That was the landmark healthcare law, possibly leading to a third showdown between the U.S. Supreme Court. But as I mentioned, all eyes are on stimulus talks as those talks remain elusive. As Mattingly reports, both parties remain far apart on that top-line number, and policies that could make up a new bill. Still very unclear whether anything can get done. Christine Romans and Christina Alessi are up and available on that. That's where we begin on COVID.
Thank you very much. Washington COVID.
Okay, so on the approaching 200,000, you mentioned in these new tapes that from Woodward, he says that he has, aside from the press, would give himself an A plus if there is a vaccine. This morning, you also mentioned the reaction to Gates. Gates talking about how the U.S. did not handle this well, and that the ban probably accelerated that the way it was executed. Trump's reaction this morning, here we go with Gates. It's always Gates, this new one. Frankly, we did quarantine, and we're very careful. He also this morning talked about the vaccine and how it would be available well before the end of the year. He talked about Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson. And then, as Richard mentioned, we also have this lack of a stimulus package, which we have a shutdown coming in a week. We have the lack of stimulus, and that is now all going to be mixed up in what is a very complicated dynamic on Capitol Hill. And that's what I got on COVID.
Okay, thank you very much. So can I open it up to thoughts on COVID, please? Okay, 200,000 Americans dead today. It's obviously an enormous moment and headline for this story. And in my opinion, the biggest story of the day. Domestic, please.
Okay, just a few other things quickly. The coast of Texas preparing for a landfall from Tropical Storm Beta this evening. Storm surge warnings in Texas and then in Louisiana, where it goes after the first landfall. Lots of rain, flash flooding, and pop-up tornadoes are the threat. We have Chad and Jennifer in the Weather Center. In the ambush of the LA deputies, these new photos from the hospital bed showing the female LA County deputy recovering, talking to President Trump, a call with the White House, those images. Miguel Marquez available on this as that manhunt goes into its second week. And then Louisville is making preparations for a decision on charges in the Breonna Taylor case, perhaps as soon as today. We don't know for sure, but federal buildings, including the courthouse, have decided to close all week. The U.S. Attorney has asked DHS to provide protection for 4 federal buildings. As CNN has reported, a grand jury impaneled earlier this month will eventually take up the case of the officers. That could be happening now. Jason Carroll and Mark Morales are in Louisville on that, and I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you. International.
Yeah, so other stories. We've got a package from Nick Robertson, who recently returned from the Irish border, where he looked at Joe Biden's Irish roots are stronger than ever, how popular he is there, his ancestral hometown cheering him on, especially after his tweets recently lending support to the Good Friday Agreement, something that's definitely on their minds during Brexit negotiations. We also we still have these comments from Pompeo and the U.S. reimposing sanctions on Iran in the mix. Sam Kiley is available on all of that. And then just lastly, Ivan Watson, Look Live today, looking at this letter to CNN sent by the Chinese government denying these reports of forced sterilization and genocide against the Uyghurs. They gave this reaction to our report, just saying they are acknowledging birth rates have declined, but are saying it's due to their implementation of family planning policy, and there's a long digital right laying that out. So that's where we start in other news.
Thank you very much. Business.
So we're continuing to track the latest developments with the U.S. and China tech sector. We saw over the weekend Trump gave his deal, his blessing on the TikTok news, but it is messy. He wants the deal to include this $5 billion for Real History Education Fund. ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, saying it was unaware of that. And Oracle and Walmart, as we know, are saying that American investors will own a majority stake of ByteDance, also contradicting this. Meanwhile, a federal judge has blocked the U.S. ban on the Chinese app WeChat, which was due to take effect on Sunday. Brian Fung is up and available today on all those threads, and that's where we begin.
Thank you very much. Washington.
Okay, so obviously the other story down here is the Supreme Court, and you know, there's obviously the RBG of it all, which didn't get very long because we're in an election season. So now all focus is on what happens next. Trump this morning saying Friday or Saturday for an announcement. He has said that it will be a woman. The memorial for RBG is likely to be Wednesday or Thursday, so you can see how this week is laying out. We learned over the weekend her dying wish was that her replacement would be nominated by the next president. And the short list, Trump said this morning that it is 5. The 3 obvious, or the two highest on this list are Amy Coney Barrett, who is obviously the darling of the conservatives, and has been front and center on the Supreme Court list for some time. And then the more political pick, Barbara Lagoa, who is a Cuban American from Florida, but has not had a chance to be vetted the way the Hill would like her vetted. So it's unclear whether they would go in that direction. The stakes on this, obviously huge, going from 5-4 to 6-3. Everything from the healthcare decision that's going to be argued right after the election to Roe versus Wade to this very messy election season and all of these things that could wind up in front of the court. And the liberals now need 2 votes to side with them in that scenario. The politics of this on the Hill, David will deal with the presidential politics, but there's a 5 p.m. meeting in McConnell's office. We obviously have Collins and Murkowski over the weekend saying that they didn't want to vote before the election. And then we're waiting on Romney, who has yet to indicate which way he's going. The problem for the Democrats is that they need 4 people, and it's really hard to figure out who that 4th person would be. Grassley and Gardner come to mind. And obviously the storyline of the huge hypocrisy, which we see most clearly with Lindsey Graham on tape, but all these Republicans who argued in 2016 that Merrick Garland should not be voted on because it was close to an election. And of course, within February, we are now in 45 days away from an election. For the Democrats' part, there's little that they can do because they don't have the votes. Oh, and just back to that, their argument now is that the White House and the Hill and the Senate are the same party, so that's why it's different this time. For the Democrats' part, all they can do is slow things down, Pelosi, or appeal to Republicans to do the right thing. Pelosi refusing over the weekend to even to rule out impeaching Trump again, or Barr, while Mon is saying that's extremely unlikely. And then just to note these Woodward tapes this weekend that were released, Trump bragging about how much he had done with the judiciary. And just on the lastly on the public opinion of it all, a new Reuters poll out this morning saying 62% of Americans, including a large number of Republicans, want the winner of the election to pick the next nominee. Trump today is traveling to Ohio. He'll have a 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock event, and we'll see if we see him around on his way out. And I think that's really the headlines on the course.
Okay, let's go ahead before we move to politics, although, actually, why don't we do this? Hey, Jeff. David, why don't you do politics, and then we'll open it up, because it's impossible. Oh. Yes?
No, go ahead. If you're going to do politics first, I just had something about Washington.
Yeah. David, let's do politics, because it's impossible to separate the two.
Totally impossible. Good morning. Just a couple things. First and foremost, I just think we have to be
really careful on our air in our analysis of this. I don't think we should be in the assumption-making business. I don't think we can assume that the vacancy will definitely have an impact on the presidential race. Certainly has an impact on the candidates themselves and their response to it. But in terms of the voters and voting decisions, we do not know that. This has been a fundamentally stable race for months through a lot of events. And I do not think that we can assume that this will have an impact. That's the one assumption we should make. The second assumption I don't think we should be making is that if it is having an impact, I'm not sure we can assume just yet which person, Trump or Biden, in the presidential race, it will benefit. In fact, if anything, in terms of raw political electoral impact, I think looking at the battle for the control of the Senate may be where this is felt most acutely. So I just think we have to be just careful, I think, about the assumptions we are making. We should be staying away from that. Virginia mentioned the Collins and Murkowski statements. I just want to stress that I think we have to be crystal clear with our viewers, readers, that we must stress the difference between somebody saying that a vote should happen after the election versus somebody saying that the winner of the presidential election should be the person who picks the successor. Those are two different things, and I don't think we can conflate them because we confuse the issue. So I just think we have to be crystal clear when we're seeking out, and especially the ones that haven't spoken yet, like Virginia said, Romney or others, really clear with the audience about what it is the senators are saying and what it is not that they are saying. You saw Joe Biden come out yesterday in the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia calling this an act of pure political power should the Senate move ahead with the confirmation process. I think there were a couple things to note there. One, note that this was not some sort of liberal rallying cry, railing speech, calls to pack the court, which, Biden has said in the past that Democrats would rue the day over that. Instead, it was a plea for Republicans to search their conscience. This is sort of quintessential Joe Biden, right? Longtime senator of that institution, is always looking for some sort of bipartisan outreach or relationships across the aisle that are important. And he was centering his comments on a plea for Republicans to search their conscience more than he was sort of, to the barricades kind of speech, which is precisely sort of his political identity throughout his career. So I think that's an interesting thing to note in his comments yesterday as well. Obviously, this is different than the complete rank hypocrisy of the Republicans that Virginia noted, and the sort of made-up excuse about the party being in power between, in the same hands between the president and the Senate, and that McConnell's made-up excuse for why this is different. But I do think it is worth noting that we should look back at Joe Biden's 2016 New York Times op-ed in March 2016, his speech at Georgetown University. At the time, he attempted to address this in his remarks yesterday, because he points to this explanation of how his position all along, whether the 92-floor speech that McConnell had pointed to back in 2016 as the Biden rule, or his 2016 comments in pursuit of getting Merrick Garland on the court, or now that it was all about advice and consent, not just consent and working with the Senate. So he has this nuanced explanation, but he did say in 2016 that he made it absolutely clear he would go forward with the confirmation process as chairman, even a few months before the presidential election, and those are his words from 2016 too. So Joe Biden obviously still needs to deal with his passwords on this as well. In terms of whether or not we hear Joe Biden talk more about this today, he will be in Wisconsin at 3:15 p.m. Eastern. Arlette Saenz is there with him, so we will see if he has more to say on the court. One thing you've already seen over the weekend, and you will continue to see, is the Biden team and the Democrats putting, and this will also be, as I was saying, look in the battle for control of the Senate, for where the politics may play out most acutely. It's going to be this battle over the ACA as the Democrats put forward how that hangs in the balance of the coverage of pre-existing conditions, all those popular measures in Obamacare, that now hangs in the balance with the way in which this court pick proceeds is something that the Democrats believe is a kitchen table, real-world impact to put before voters in this election season of these next 6 weeks about the court pick. And we will certainly hear more from Biden on that. Just three other notes here quickly that I just want to mention, unrelated to the court, but just wrapping up politics. We finally now have, you've heard me say for weeks on this call about Joe Biden's closing the fundraising advantage with Trump, but now we have the cash on hand, which is the all-important matter. What do you have in the bank account after you've spent? And as of September 1st, Joe Biden hasn't only erased Donald Trump's advantage, he's completely overwhelmed it and has created his own advantage, $141 million cash-on-hand advantage at the beginning of September after his astounding fundraising in August, and where he spent 2 times as much, it seems, as the Trump campaign in August. He still enters September and the final 2-month stretch of the election with a $141 million cash advantage over an incumbent who had this advantage throughout the duration of the last 3 years, and it just got squandered, and it's just an astounding number. We talk a lot about the Latino vote on this call. Wall Street Journal, NBC News, Telemundo out with a national poll looking at Latinos, where Biden was at 62% support, in the neighborhood of where Hillary Clinton was back in 2016. I think the poll had her at 66% support again. That's nationally. And yesterday we put out our updated Electoral College Outlook Road to 270, showing how much defense Trump is still playing and how, but not just nationally, but in the battle for 270, it is hard not to see him still as the underdog in this race as we go into these final 43 days. I think that's where we start. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Okay, let's open it up for thoughts on politics, Washington, anything that you want to bring up. Let's start with Michael, please.
Yeah, Jeff, I just wanted to talk about what I think is one of the biggest end results of Ginsburg's seat currently being open, which we've talked about a little bit on our air, but it's about health care. And Virginia mentioned, obviously, that the conservatives are looking to go to 6-3, but right now the court is theoretically on Obamacare 4-4, which means that if the court considers that the week after the election and there's not, even without a new justice being seated, if they were 4-4, if Roberts did stay with the liberals on Obamacare, it would revert to the lower court ruling, which would toss out Obamacare. So I think we need to heavily continue to focus on the fact that health care for 20 to 30 million of Americans is on the line, and the president has been saying since July that he has a health care plan. We've done some good conversations and stories about that. Phil Mattingly had an excellent piece on it a couple of weeks ago. But I really think this health care thing needs to be front and center in the conversation about you mentioned the big stories. It's about coronavirus, it's about the court, it's about the election. It bridges all three of those things at a time when we're in this major pandemic. The health care for millions, tens of millions of Americans is on the line. And if indeed the court stays at 8 justices going into that decision in November, it's very likely that Obamacare will be thrown out. And so I just think we cannot do enough on where is the president's plan. Mark Meadows says there's a plan. They all have a big plan. None of the senators have any idea what it is. We can't stop talking about that. I think we should talk about it every single day.
Okay, so I'll open it up in a moment for others, but this was my exact note too, and I think Michael has captured it. I think we are way over-focused on the politics of the selection and when it's going to get done, and we need much more focus on Obamacare, ACA in the balance, as Michael has laid out, and where is the Trump health care plan. The debate is 1 week from tomorrow, which is another storyline that we should start to look at. But are we going to have a health care plan before that? So I think that health care needs to be front and center in a lot of these discussions. It's more contextual, and we need to spend the time in doing that. I'll just add before I open it up, the debate, as I said, is a week from tomorrow. The first debate is a week from tomorrow. And to respond to David Chalian's points about politics, I don't know why we would expect any of these politicians to have a conscience and or expect that politics wouldn't be completely hypocritical. And for us to expect anything else would be naive. Other thoughts?
I wanted to say that there is a caravan being organized by a couple of civil rights groups and organizations to sort of appear at Mitch McConnell's offices in Kentucky. I think it was the Poor People's Campaign and the AFL-CIO joined a pledge with them last week, and they were already organizing this caravan before Ginsburg died. And so, obviously what they're advocating for is stop playing games with the lives of poor and low-income people relating to health care and some of the other things you've mentioned. So there may be some interesting footage coming out of Kentucky. And I also wanted to go back to TikTok just for a second because it just seems so bizarre to me that, that Trump would be able to get a $5 billion tax, some sort of tax from Oracle relating to American education, quote unquote, air quotes, real American education. I don't know what the legalities are or regulation is around that, but that's just a very, to me, bizarre piece of this deal, if it's true. And is it even, can he even do that? Continuing to advance this idea of real education in American history and patriotic history.
Other thoughts?
And Jeff, I'd like to add one thing. Jeff, David was talking about fundraising and the presidential race. He also mentioned that focus on the Senate races in the wake of, especially maybe heightened in the wake of Ginsburg. It just seems on social media and sort of anecdotally that there's a lot of push of money since Ginsburg died into Senate races. Some people to McConnell's opponent, although McConnell in the latest polls, again, who knows whether polls are right or not, but he seems fairly firmly ahead in Kentucky. I don't know what the expectations are for whether or not he's in danger in Kentucky, but I do think that there's a growing wave of people who want to take him out as majority leader, and they've been pushing money into the campaigns in places like Maine and Colorado and Montana and places like that. And I do think a story about Senate fundraising would be a good idea, and whether or not since Friday night there's been a surge in the amount of money that Democratic candidates in those hotly contested states have seen.
I mean, Michael, just to that point, in the first 48 hours, Act Blue, the main vehicle to collect Democratic online grassroots donations, had raised more than $100 million for candidates after Ginsburg's death.
I think that's a really good story that we should highlight.
Along those lines, I thought it was super interesting that AOC popped up yesterday with Schumer, since she's obviously not a senator and doesn't really have a say in this process. I just thought it was a super interesting strategic choice of the Democrats and worth our conversation and exploration into how they might be approaching this extremely differently from battles in the past. And she seems to be like a symbol of that.
Yeah, and what's even more interesting about that is that, there's a lot of speculation that she's going to run against Schumer for the Senate seat. So I agree with you. Other thoughts?
Jeff, as we hit 200,000 lives today, and of course there's the story that CNN broke and put out there about the CDC changing its guidance, acknowledging coronavirus spreads through through the air, I think it's worth asking the question, how many of those 200,000 lives could have been saved if the CDC said what they said on Friday, on February 7th, when Donald Trump said it to Bob Woodward, that it goes through the air and that's how it's passed. Did they hold off because of the president's policy of downplaying the virus? We don't know, but it's 6 months too late.
Yes, Ben, I would just add, I would be really surprised if Trump or a lot of people at that time understood the difference between, direct airborne transmission versus the aerosolized airborne transmission, which is more of what we're talking about now. So I'd be a little careful with shows, comparing that, but I would say it's absolutely fair that, virtually all of the death could have been prevented had action been taken earlier. We could be in the hundreds or, 4 digits of deaths as opposed to crossing 200.
Hey, Jeff, I was just wondering if your comment about focusing on healthcare was a sign to everybody that we should back off on covering the outrage and anger that's there because of what is happening regarding the hypocrisy. Of course, putting aside the naivete that it would be done any differently, but to have people, as we have cataloged, saying one thing 4 years ago and then doing another thing is, I think, emotionally upsetting to so many people that it seems to be that 2 or 3 days of focusing on that seems to be appropriate.
Okay. Well, first of all, we have done it for 48 hours. One.
Well, the weekday audience is a little different than the weekend audience, and you've said that in the past.
First of all, we've covered it for 48 hours. Second of all, I'm not suggesting we back off the hypocrisy at all. And third, what we have undercovered is the healthcare aspect of what's at risk here. So the things are not mutually exclusive, but we are spending all of our time on the politics and hypocrisy, and none of it on the healthcare piece. That's all. We can do all of it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts? Anyone else? Okay. Digital.
Good morning. We had 34 million uniques back on Friday. Higher number than usual, naturally, because of the death of RBG. Audiences flocked to us in that moment. And then over the weekend, we were mid-20s. On RBG, there were lots of standout pieces from the weekend, but I want to mention Joan Biskupic's piece on 20 years of closed-door conversations. That, along with the gallery of RBG's life, had more than 3 minutes time spent on average. So standout pieces in terms of engagement. Also big this past weekend, Harrington's poll of the week on the possibility of a Biden blowout. And on COVID, the second wave in Europe got a lot of interest, and that continues. This morning, we don't have anything above 10,000 concurrents yet. The virus CLE is number 1, along with the CDC's updated guidance. The Emmys winners list is in the top 5. Collinson's piece on the Supreme Court fight adds a stunning new twist to a crisis election. It's a good classic Collinson dot connecting piece. And then an op-ed on the GOP push to fill RBG's seat could backfire spectacularly. Those are in the top 5 this morning. A couple more things on RBG up today. What her death means for the economy, Wall Street, and corporate America. Matt Egan has that. And then we did a call out asking for tributes over the weekend. We have almost 1,000 responses so far, and we are publishing many of those. And then just so everyone knows, in case you missed it, the video team experimented with an RBG digital channel, a stream of interviews, features with her and about her. It's just a really great experiment. On the fires, a couple of headlines. We're not letting go of that. The wildfire weary Californians considering uprooting their lives. It's a good piece from Ray Sanchez. And then we have Nicole Chavez on the absolutely terrible week for Californians with the fires, the quakes, and the virus surge. Those go together very well. On international, a handful of good analysis that are worth shouting out. The UK's doubling virus cases means Boris Johnson can't wake up from his COVID nightmare. That's from Luke McGee. From James Griffiths in Hong Kong, we have a solutions-minded piece about Australia's virus lockdown. It was effective and could be a model for the U.S. Those international, global comparisons are really good pieces that do well for us. The Xinjiang government confirming the huge birth rate drop but denying forced sterilization of Uyghur women from Ivan Watson and team is up and strong, and so is Nick Robertson at the UN this week. Trump will be denied something he loves, a live audience. That's part of our UN at 75 package. And then lastly, I just want to mention the Emmys last night. The DLE peaked at about 15,000 concurrents, which is not bad at all for a Sunday night. We have some good pieces that are in the top 10 list this morning. History made with Black actor wins, the best winner speeches, most noteworthy moments, and other kinds of good Emmy stuff. That's it.
Thank you very much. John?
Good morning, Jeff. So right now we have Elizabeth Cohen in the top spot as we wait for that 200,000 death threshold number to be reached. And lots of headlines to hit before that. Gottlieb on the spike of infections. What we are seeing across the country, 28 states with rising cases. And once we do hit that 200,000 mark, we're ready to roll with that. We have Sanjay's piece loaded. We'll hit that. And lots of doctor voices, Carlos Del Rio, Megan Ranney, Leanna Wen, Tom Inglesby from Johns Hopkins, and some of the other headlines, the CDC on air droplets, all those cases tied to flying, CDC on eating in restaurants, and more evidence of the risk that poses. But we'll be doing a lot on COVID and certainly on the 200,000 mark. This afternoon also we have some families of recent victims' books so we can keep putting a face on that really grim, astounding number. Internationally, we'll hit Scott McLean in the UK, as well as Melissa Bell on the spiking numbers in France and Spain. On the Supreme Court battle, Capitol Hill, front and center, Manu Raju, Lauren Fox, and Phil Mattingly. The state of play note this morning was really interesting and just laid out everything that's being considered on the Hill right now. We'll obviously watch to see if Romney or Craig Gardner sound off. I know this chase is going for them, and if we get any inkling of what they're going to do, we'll go out significantly around that. John Harwood and Caitlin Collins on Trump's timeline, John Skupik, Ariane DeVoe on the short list of nominees, and then we have a lot of other bookings along with them, Jeffrey Toobin, Steve Vladeck, and others to really look at the impact of the court, future cases, and we will be landing on the future of the Affordable Care Act as a focus today. Brianna has the White House Deputy Press Secretary, Brian Morgenstern, lined up, and we will ask a lot about Trump's plan and where is it. And then how it plays in the campaign trail. We have Arlette Symes in Wisconsin. We'll take the Biden speech at 3:15. We'll watch for Trump when he leaves at 3 o'clock to see what he says. And finally, the other story that we are watching today is Jason Carroll in Louisville. We'll see if we get any kind of grand jury decision in the Breonna Taylor case and build that around that if and when that happens today.
Okay. Thank you very much. Washington?
Good morning. So before we'll watch, of course, the 200,000 milestone. Nick Watt has our COVID wrap spot. Sanjay, of course, as well. On Supreme Court, Manu with a piece on the senators to watch, and we'll look at the Obamacare ruling and the balance and what's at stake. Caitlin with the donor from the White House, Arlette on Biden. We'll see what the Vice President says at 3:15. And Ken Law has a piece on how campaigns are handling their ground game during the pandemic.
And in the Situation Room, we also will be hitting the gravity of this 200,000 mark whenever it happens. As Trump says, he'd give himself an A+ on the handling of all of this. We'll follow on this new CDC guidance on aerosolized spread, as well as the gravity of the Gates comments, Trump dismissing them. All of this is more than half the country is trending in the wrong direction, and the average daily deaths are just under 1,000 a day. We'll have the Watts and Jones wrap pieces, and we'll hit our international lists as well. We'll watch to see how the SCOTUS developments unfold through the day ahead of what Trump says will be his Friday or Saturday announcement. We'll watch any movement with members on the Hill, and will more GOP senators join Murkowski and Collins in holding out. And then we'll take the broader look at what this means for policy, Obamacare hanging in the balance, and where is this Trump plan, healthcare plan that everyone in the administration says is ready, but we still haven't seen. We'll watch Trump when he leaves for Ohio at 3 o'clock, and then again during our 5 o'clock hour. We have Bob Woodward booked today, so we plan to go along with him on all of the stories mentioned, coronavirus chief among them. We have Sanjay and our doctors. We'll get into our legal and political discussions with our analysts there. And we have Senator Dick Durbin booked.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts? Anybody have anything they want to bring up? Have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.